The first fog of the dark season arrived on a Tuesday, sliding in from the Atlantic like an animal that already knew our names. By noon, the island had shrunk to a handful of sounds: gulls knitting the air, the throb of the generator, my boots on metal stairs. Light keeps promises here, even when people don't. So I climbed to keep mine. The lantern room was a glass cage beaded with salt. I swung open the hatch and felt the wind pat my jacket, damp and insistent. The Fresnel lens waited, a giant, faceted eye. "Good morning," I told it, and the sound stitched me back together. It's a habit, talking to objects that work as hard as I do. I checked the wick height, the oil level, the little misalignments that begin as whispers and end as shipwrecks. The foghorn's timer clicked into readiness. When I wiped the lens panels with distilled water, the cloth came away a history of recent weather: fine dust from dry days, salt from the last gale, a smear of soot from the supply boat that had idled too close. This is my arithmetic. Subtract grit, add light, multiply reach, divide danger. By the time I clattered down the iron steps, the fog had thickened from veil to fabric. It muted the whitewashed keeper's house and erased the line where C should be. I could taste metal on my tongue. The kitchen smelled of paraffin, yeast, and the last of the summer apples. I sliced one and ate it over the sink, watching the fog move as if it were thinking. That's when the knocking started. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 more. Not the mailboat. He always leaned on the horn like a boast. I wiped my hands and went to the door. He stood there with damp curls stuck to his brow, water shining on his parka like a second skin. He was smiling the way people do when they're cold and pretending not to be. "Hi, Mara," he said, as if we hadn't decided not to do this anymore. Could I? My field station lost power. The gull cameras went dark. I thought you might still have a spare inverter. Also, he lifted a plastic box. "Scones." I overestimated how much a man can think. "About the scones or about power loss?" I asked. "Either," he said, and the grin wobbled into something earnest. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside because the word no can make a house colder than fog. He smelled like kelp and rain and the soap I once left in his shower. I noticed he'd started growing a beard, a tentative one that hadn't decided whether to commit. He dropped the box on the table and stood there awkwardly, hands hovering, as if asking permission to exist. "I'll fetch the inverter," I said. "Tea, please," he said softly. "And Mara, I can help with the upper balcony bolts later, if you've not got to them yet." I poured water from the kettle. We moved around one another like boats that shared a harbor but no longer a mooring. He peeled back the lid on the scones and I pretended not to care that they were still warm. "How many cameras?" I asked. 8, he said. 2 at the Bluff Colony, 3 on Nests, 3 on the Tide Rack. I was running a time series on parental attendance. "The juveniles are late this year. You'll chalk it to climate variance." I set the tea in front of him. His hands wrapped the mug gratefully, their knuckles reddened by wind. "You always do. I'll chalk it to what the data say." He met my eyes then, gray irises catching a paler ring of light from the window. "But the models don't comfort me anymore." I didn't ask what did. Once, the answer would have been me. Once, he had learned the rhythm of my work and matched it. Oil, wick, lens, light, breakfast, notes, tide, lunch, repair, reset, dusk, flash. Once, we would lie under a map of pinholes, my grandmother's lace curtain thrown over a lamp, and he would press his forehead to mine and say, "You are the constant." We know better now. The inverter was exactly where I'd told myself not to leave it, on the bottom shelf by the tool chest. I crouched, pulled it out, and felt the tug in my lower back. That means I have been doing this job with my whole spine. When I straightened, he was watching me with the old worry, the tender one I don't trust anymore. "I'll carry it," he said, reaching. "I've got it," I said, too quickly. We walked to the door together. The fog licked at the threshold as if tasting us. He shifted the scone box under his arm. "For the record," he said, tone careful as he found his footing on the slick stone, "I came because of the cameras, but I am not unhappy to see you." "Statistics allow multiple true statements," I said. He laughed, for real this time, and it hurt me for how easily my body recognized that sound. We set off along the path cut into the turf, the lighthouse on our right a pale ghost, the sea on our left a rumor. He told me about a kid awake with a healed wing fracture that had managed to raise a chick anyway. I told him about a hairline crack in the lantern room glazing that would need epoxy before the next gale. "Would you like company on the balcony later?" he asked. "The balcony is where we lean harnessed into wind and pretend courage is a tool. It's safer with two." "Safety is a function of attention," I said. "But yes, if the fog lifts." It didn't. By late afternoon we were both slick with the kind of damp that outsmarts oilskin. He rigged the inverter at his station, and the cameras blinked back into obedience. We ate scones with salty butter in the shelter of the lee wall, our knees touching because there was nowhere else for them to go. A gull landed 3 yards away and cocked its head, as if judging our species' choices. "I got an email," he said, not looking at me. "She's coming to the island. Just for a week. The Foundation asked her to review our data collection protocol. She's your co-author," I supplied, and packed the butter more firmly into its wax paper skin. The foghorn bellowed, patient as an old animal. "Of course." He touched a scar on his left wrist absently. I knew its texture. Once, I'd learned it by heart. "It's professional," he said, finally looking up. "It's just she sees patterns I miss. And misses some you don't," I said. "She taught me to ask better questions," he said. "She taught you to leave the light on without ever coming home to it," I said, and stood before my voice could wind itself any tighter. "The afternoon check is due." We made for the tower. Inside, our footsteps drained upward in a spiral, iron talking to bone. At the service deck, I clipped myself to the safety line, swung out onto the balcony, and felt the first drop of rain that wasn't fog. The ocean breathed somewhere out there. I checked the brackets, the bolt threads, the stanchion heads. He braced the door with a shoulder and passed me the torque wrench, his fingers steady in the old economy of us. Hand, tool, task. We worked until the knuckles of the sky went white. When we came back in, I found him tracing the edge of the lens with his eyes, as if it could tell him who to be. "Do you remember what you said the first time you saw this?" I asked. He smiled small. "That it's a cathedral of math." "And I told you," I said, "that it's a church of mercy." I set my palm lightly on the glass, careful not to smudge what I had cleaned. "It bends light so that strangers live." He stepped closer. The fog made the room a private sphere. "Mara, about the email. About her. About us." He swallowed. "I'm trying to be honest." "Honesty is not the same as choosing," I said. The bulb flicked on. A test pulse. Light moved through the lens and out into the white, a word written for ships we could not see. "You may tell the truth and still keep me as your control. She remains your experiment." "That isn't fair," he said, but too softly, as if afraid of the answer. "Fairness is not a unit I can measure," I said, unhooking my harness. "But I can measure bolt torque and oil depth and the yardage between you and whatever you're not done with." He flinched like a bird that had misread a window. "I came for the inverter," he said, as if the sentence could save him. "And you have it," I said, as gently as I could afford. "You'd best go before the path floods." He reached for the box of scones, thought better of it, and left them on the table. "I'll come by tomorrow," he said, backing through the door. "Just to help with the glazing. It will be easier with for hands." "Statistics again," I said, and didn't smile. He went down the steps. I listened until the sound of his boots dissolved into the fog's soft appetite. Then I turned back to the lens and checked the wick one more time. Night had finished arriving. I set the timer, wound the mechanism, and watched the first revolution begin. One blink for each living thing out there. One blink for the part of myself that still wanted to be waited for. Light keeps promises here, even when people don't. I kept mine. The fog lingered for 2 more days, swallowing horizon and horizon again, until I stopped asking when it would clear. Routine is the only compass on this island. Oil the mechanism, wind the timer, check the lamp's heartbeat. Every revolution is a sentence I've already read, and yet it still steadies me. He came again on the 3rd morning. Not knocking this time, just a faint whistle from the footpath too short, one long. It was the pattern we'd used last winter, back when he brought hot bread on storm nights and called it field ration diplomacy. I opened the door halfway. "You know, the fog won't lift just because you haunt it," He smiled. That tentative peace offering curve. Then it's good. I brought offerings. A thermos, 2 mugs, and what looked suspiciously like the last jar of his homemade blackberry jam. Inside, the lighthouse hummed its endless monologue. We sat at the wooden table, steam making small ghosts between us. I replaced the glazing bolts, I said, half for half. I saw, he answered. Clean work. You torque by feel or by spec? By resentment, I said. He laughed softly. That's precise enough. Silence folded itself neatly. The foghorn moaned somewhere beyond us, long and low, as if testing both our frequencies. He poured tea. I could tell from the color he still forgot I'd take mine lighter. Habits don't fade, they calcify. Mara, he began, cautious. Do you ever think about leaving the island? I traced the rim of my cup. Only when I want to ruin a good day. He smiled again, smaller this time. I thought you might say that. The mainland's changing so fast. They're automating half the coastal lights. Remote operation, satellite feedback, high monitoring light without hands, I said. Soulless efficiency. He nodded. Progress. Progress is a word invented by people who hate maintenance, I said. That made him look at me the way he used to, the almost laugh that hides regret. You'd still find work anywhere, he said. You fix things. People need that. I fix things that stay where they're broken. He leaned back. Maybe that includes people. Not anymore. For a long while the only sound was the kettle cooling and the faint tap of gulls landing on the balcony rail. I counted 7 shadows through the window, the same flock that nested on the western cliff. They always circled when weather turned. A ring of gulls is a bad omen to sailors, a protection to keepers. Depends who you ask. He followed my gaze. They remember you, he said. They remember food, I corrected. No. They remember you climbing out during that January squall, when everyone thought the clutch would drown. Occupational hazard, I said. He smiled, then turned serious. Elena used to say gulls are proof that survival isn't grace, just stubborn math. The name cracked open the air between us. It wasn't deliberate. I could tell it just lived too close to his tongue. Elena, I repeated, to hear how much it still hurt. The syllables landed cold. So she defines grace now. She defines data collection standards for half the foundation, he said quickly. That's all I meant. Of course. I closed the thermos, tight enough for the metal to squeal. Standards and samples. You two were always a tidy data set. Mara, his tone shifted, softer. Don't what? Turn the whole thing into proof against me. It proves itself. He looked at me as if searching for a shoreline in fog. You still keep the records, right? The maintenance log, I nodded. Could I see them? I need baseline visibility readings before she arrives. For context, there it was again. She arrives. The inevitable variable. I stood, fetched the logbook from the shelf, and placed it on the table. His fingers brushed mine accidental, but memory doesn't know the difference. He flipped through the pages. My handwriting marched in rows, each entry dated, neat, restrained. Oil level, lamp angle, fog density, wind direction, sea state. Every note a heartbeat I'd preserved instead of us. You're still meticulous, he murmured. Someone should be, I said. He closed the book gently, like setting down something fragile. I'll copy the data later, if you don't mind. I don't mind numbers, I said. They don't lie by omission. He exhaled. You're right. They just failed to explain. The gulls cried louder, spiraling into the fog until the sound blurred. For a moment, the whole island felt weightless, a dot between mist and sea. He rose. I'll get out of your way. Forecast says wind shift by nightfall. Then the light will reach farther, I said. Maybe far enough, he whispered, half to himself. When he was gone, the air he'd stirred stayed moving, a soft draft brushing the tea steam. I walked to the balcony where the gulls had left their feather scatter. From up here, the fog thinned just enough to show the dark line of his station roof below. A lone figure moving him, adjusting tripods, a creature of pattern. Like me, the lamp began its next revolution. Across the gray, he paused and looked up. For a heartbeat, the beam crossed him, gilding the salt on his face. He raised one hand, not quite a wave, not quite a goodbye. I could have answered. I didn't. The ring of gulls tightened. wheeling above us both, as if drawing a circle no one would step out of. The wind changed overnight. I woke to a sound like paper-tearing gusts scraping along the glass, rearranging the world in invisible hands. Fog had thinned 2 ribbons, and through it, morning light poured in as if the island had been forgiven for something. I dressed, climbed the tower, and lit the lamp's pilot flame. The lens threw a clean blade across the gray sea. For the first time in days, the horizon returned distant, disciplined, too sharp to touch. When I came down, the radio crackled. A voice from the harbor authority reading coordinates, wind data, and finally, incoming research vessel, ETA 1300 hours. Passenger, Dr. Elena Voss. The name clanged in my chest. The syllables had weight heavy as a wrench dropped on metal. He was already outside, kneeling in the grass beside a tripod, camera guts exposed like a patient mid-surgery. The gulls hovered overhead, waiting for movement that meant food. Harbor just called, I said, crossing my arms. Your co-author's on her way. He froze, then looked up, sunlight hitting the side of his face. So soon? That's what arrivals do, I said. They happen. He wiped his hands on his jacket. They didn't tell me the date. I thought next week. Schedules change. I shrugged. Maybe they wanted to surprise you. He gave a small, helpless laugh. Elena never liked surprises. No, I said. She just caused them. He turned away, adjusting the tripod legs to avoid my eyes. I'll need to recalibrate the data relay before she docks. Of course you will. I went back inside. The kettle clicked. The old clock ticked. The tower hummed. The ordinary things made louder by the one extraordinary name. Around noon, I saw the ship-wide hull, blue stripe, steady against the swells. It looked like something too sure of itself. I stood at the balcony, binoculars pressed to my eyes. A small figure leaned on the rail, tall, composed, blonde hair bound in a knot that the wind refused to ruin. She wore field gear that probably cost more than the lighthouse roof. Even from this distance, I could tell she was the type who moved through weather like it owed her courtesy. He was already heading down to the cove. The path cut through heather and rock, a line I knew by memory. I watched him shrink into distance until the gulls claimed him. By the time I reached the jetty, the research vessel had anchored. I heard voices, his and hers, woven together in the clatter of ropes and engines. When I stepped closer, she turned. Elena Voss looked exactly like an unkept promise. Mara, right? She said, extending a gloved hand. Her accent was softer than I expected, German vowels polished by years abroad. I've read your maintenance notes. Precise work. Someone has to keep the light alive, I said. She smiled, not cruelly, just absently, the kind of smile used on everyone. And you do it well. We'll need a stable baseline for the next dataset. I'm told you know the lamp better than anyone. I nodded once. I suppose I do. He stepped between us. Almost reflex. Elena, this is Mara. Mara, Dr. Voss. We've met, she said lightly, still holding my gaze. In writing. Right. He said quickly. You'll be staying at the north cabin. It's a bit rough, but I like rough, she said, scanning the island as if appraising it for purchase. It tells the truth. Her eyes were pale blue, almost translucent. The kind of color that makes you believe in distance. We carried her equipment up the slope, cases of cameras, solar panels, a crate of labeled samples. The wind tasted of rain and metal. He insisted on taking the heavier load. I didn't argue. By the time we reached a ridge, she was already asking him about data intervals and error margins. Their conversation moved in numbers, fluent and private. I might as well have been part of the landscape, functional, necessary, unseen. At the top, she paused to look at the lighthouse. It's smaller than I imagined, she said. It's enough, I replied. She smiled again. You must feel quite isolated here. Isolation is a kind of clarity, I said. Or a symptom, she said, and walked ahead. He threw me an apologetic glance, but didn't stop her. Back inside the lantern room, I logged the day's readings, wrote down her arrival time in neat script. 1307 hours, Dr. Voss disembarked. Subject of interest, his pulse. That evening, the three of us shared dinner in the keeper's house, soup, bread, and the last of the apples baked in sugar. Elena spoke easily, hands punctuating every sentence with elegance. She told stories about fieldwork in Patagonia, a station buried under snow, a night when auroras colored the sea green. I listened, pretending my silence was hospitality. He laughed more in 1 hour than in the last month. Each time, I felt the room tilt a little, as if gravity had remembered someone else. When she mentioned the new algorithm she'd designed for nesting prediction, he leaned in. "You never told me you published that." "I didn't want to until the model stabilized," she said. "You'd have argued with the equations." "Probably," he admitted. "You were usually right." "I'm always right," she said, smiling. The spoon in my hand hit the bowl a little too hard. She noticed, of course. "Forgive me," she said, as though it were a game. "I talk too much." "Not at all," I said. "The air up here needs sound." Later, when they moved to the maps spread across the table, I excused myself. The night had gone quiet except for the light's revolving sigh. I stepped onto the porch, the chill hitting my face sharp and clean. Through the window, I saw them heads bent over the same map, shoulders nearly touching, their reflections caught together in the glass. The lamp turned, and for a brief second, its beam crossed their faces. She looked luminous. He looked young. I closed the door behind me without sound. Outside, the gulls were asleep, but the sea wasn't. The tide murmured against the rocks like someone practicing forgiveness. In the distance, the light completed another revolution. I whispered to no one. Light keeps promises. People don't. And the beam kept moving, as if to prove me right. Science, they say, is about removing bias. Love, they forget to mention, is about living inside it. 3 days after Elena arrived, the island turned into a field station that no longer needed me. She and he worked from dawn to mistfall, comparing samples, running counts, feeding their data into twin laptops that hummed like synchronized hearts. Everywhere I turned, there were their footprints in the lab corner, on the stairwell, across the kitchen floor. The rhythm of the lighthouse had shifted from solitude to duet, and I was no longer part of the song. They called it collaboration. I called it calibration, because every smile between them adjusted something I could not measure. "Could you record the lux values again, Mara?" Elena asked one morning, her tone bright with practiced politeness. She was kneeling beside the window, sunlight stitching gold into her hair. He sat beside her, jotting numbers in his field book. I noted the reading. "Read it aloud, 573. "Perfect," she said. "Consistent with yesterday's run." "You're very precise." "I have to be," I said. "People rely on this light." Her smile held serene. "So do birds. So does research." He looked up, about to say something, then didn't. When the foghorn sounded, low and mournful, she flinched slightly, the first imperfect motion I had seen from her. He reached to steady her shoulder without thinking. His hand lingered half a heartbeat too long. I pretended to recalibrate the meter, though the numbers blurred. There it was, the small, involuntary mercy of touch that hurts the one watching. After lunch, I escaped to the cliffs. The wind there had no memory, only force. Below, the tide pressed against basalt, white foam like lace unraveling. From here, the lighthouse looked fragile, almost ornamental, a glass throat swallowing light and exhaling hope. I sat until my tea in the thermos cooled, and the ache in my chest flattened into silence. When I returned, dusk had folded itself around the island. Through the kitchen window, I saw them bent over a screen, the soft light painting their faces close together. Laughter escaped, brief and unguarded. He had always laughed like that when he forgot the world, a sound of trust before betrayal learns its language. I went upstairs quietly. The lamp waited. The night didn't. Duty is easy when the heart has nowhere else to be. By the time I finished the lamp's nightly checks, the sea was black glass. He joined me at the base of the tower, a flashlight haloing his face. "Long day," he said. "For some more productive than others," I replied. He hesitated. "You're angry." "Observation," I said. "Not hypothesis." "Mara." He rubbed his temple, a gesture of fatigue. "This work, it matters. She's brilliant at pattern recognition. The models can't tell you who bleeds keeping the data clean," I said. He frowned. "It's not a competition." "Then stop keeping score." Silence swelled between us, deep as tidewater. He sighed. "You think I don't see what this is doing to you?" "I think you see it. And you measure it, and you call it noise. He winced, then forced a small laugh. You should publish that. Emotional interference in field conditions, double-blind, I said. He blinked. What? That's what you've built, I said. You and her testing your theories while pretending you can't see what's obvious. I stepped closer. The wind caught my hair, tangling it between us. You can't keep using me as your control. Mara, you expose me to the same variables. Expect me to stay constant. My voice stayed calm, almost scientific. But constants break when you measure them too often. He swallowed hard. That's not what I meant to, I know. I smiled, small, exhausted. Intent doesn't cancel effect. For a moment, I thought he'd reach for me. He didn't. The flashlight trembled in his hand, a brief flicker against the tower wall. I don't want to hurt you, he said finally. Then stop studying me, I whispered. He turned off the flashlight. Darkness took shape between us, vast and merciful. The foghorn cried again, long, distant, and weary, like the sound of something warning itself. It began with a message on the community board. Field exhibition. Avian migration study open presentation. 1800 hours. Research cabin. Elena's handwriting, neat and deliberate. A small drawing of a gull beside her name, as if the world needed reminding who the scientist was. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Public presentations are rare on the island. There are only 8 of us here in rotation. The harbor keeper, 2 weather officers, 1 medic, and the rest of us who prefer instruments to company. Still, when a ship brings new faces, everyone shows up. It breaks the monotony like a match in dark water. He came into the kitchen while I was still reading the notice. She wants to share preliminary results, he said, trying for casual. Just a short slideshow. You should come. I should. It's our data too, he said quickly. You kept the light steady for the entire observation window. You're part of it, am I? I asked. I thought I was just a baseline. His mouth tightened. Mara, don't do this tonight. She means well. She usually does, I said. That evening, I put on my cleanest sweater, gray, practical, unromantic, and walked to the north cabin. The path smelled of seaweed and diesel from the generators. The sky was the color of unpolished silver, the kind of evening that refuses to commit to beauty. Inside, the air buzzed with conversation and weak wine. The island's few inhabitants had gathered, boots muddy, faces red from wind. Elena stood near the makeshift projector, graceful as a compass needle. He was beside her, laptop open, checking slides. When she saw me, she smiled the way professionals do perfectly. Mara, wonderful you came. We were just about to start. I nodded and found a corner. The lights dimmed. The first image appeared. A gull mid-flight, wings rimmed with sunrise. Then charts, temperature curves, nest occupancy plots. Her voice was calm, confident, and each time she said our observations, his name followed. Not once did she mention mine. I knew that omission was not malice. It was method. She liked things clean, categorized, unambiguous. A keeper doesn't fit in a research paper. We're just part of the conditions section, between wind speed and humidity range. But hearing him laugh at her joke about the gull's uncanny sense of timing felt like someone quietly closing a door. He laughed the way he used to laugh with me, forehead tipped forward, shoulders relaxing as if his body had remembered its old grammar but forgot its audience. I wanted to leave. I didn't. The last slide was a photo one I'd taken weeks ago without thinking. The lighthouse in morning fog, lens glowing, a single gull perched on the railing. He must have used my camera, my folder. No credit line, of course. But the caption read, "Guiding light captured during observation cycle by field team." Applause followed. Elena thanked everyone, promising full results by autumn. Someone poured her more wine. He stood beside her, smiling that mild, careful smile, the one he wears when he's pretending the world is balanced. I slipped out before anyone noticed. Outside, the air was cold enough to taste. Down by the shore, the sea reflected faint ribbons of light from the cabin windows, like spilled data leaking into the tide. Halfway up the path, I heard footsteps behind me. He caught up, breath misting. "You left early." "I've seen the results," I said. "Mara, she's good," I interrupted. "You make an excellent team." "That's not fair." Neither is omission. He stopped walking. You know she didn't mean she doesn't have to mean, I said. She only has to measure. The wind slid between us, sharp and cold. I didn't choose her over you, he said quietly. This isn't that. Then what is it? He hesitated, and that hesitation was the answer. I'm tired, I said, and you're needed elsewhere. When I turned away, he didn't follow. From the ridge, I looked back once the research cabin glowing like a lantern too far from shore. Inside, their shadows moved across the walls, two figures bent over something bright. Back at the lighthouse, I wound the timer, trimmed the wick, and set the lens turning. Light, at least, doesn't forget its task. For every revolution, it forgives. I do not. The wind arrived before the warning. By noon, the barometer had dropped 3 millibars and kept falling, a silent countdown no one was listening to. The sky bruised purple along the horizon. The gulls fled inland. Even the sea looked uncertain, as if it had forgotten which direction to breathe. Elena was still at the north cabin, reviewing footage. He had gone to help her secure the instruments before the gale hit. I stayed to check the lamp, though we all knew the light might not hold if the glass cracked again. The first gust slammed into the tower hard enough to rattle the stairs. I braced myself against the wall and climbed, one hand on the railing, the other clutching the oil can like it could keep me steady. At the top, the world was a white roar. The lantern room trembled. Rain came sideways, hissing through the seams. I closed the hatch behind me and locked it, the metal vibrating with the force of something trying to enter. Lightning flashed, a single vein splitting the clouds. For a second, the sea appeared, monstrous, shifting, infinite. I checked the lamp. The flame guttered, fought, lived. I whispered to it, maybe to myself, hold on. Below, the foghorn bellowed like an animal warning its offspring. Through the glass, I could barely make out the path to the cove. A small figure was running against the wind, not toward shelter, but toward the shore. A flash of yellow slicker, the shape unmistakable. Him. For one heartbeat, the thought was pure disbelief. Then came the old reflex. Move. I grabbed the safety line, clipped it to my belt, and pushed into the storm. The door nearly tore from its hinges. Rain slapped my face like cold hands. The rope sang against the railing, taut and angry. The ground outside had turned to liquid mud. Every step was a negotiation. Down the slope, wind shoved me sideways, salt stinging my eyes. The sea was already chewing at the rocks below. He was at the cove edge, trying to haul in one of the tripods before it vanished into the surf. Elena stood several meters away, shouting something I couldn't hear, her hair plastered flat against her skull. Leave it! I screamed. The wind swallowed my voice. He pulled again, stubborn, boots half underwater. Another surge came, a black wall that folded over the rocks, ripping the tripod from his grip and slamming it into the tide rack. Metal screeched. He staggered. I ran. The rope bit into my waist, but I kept running until my boots found the edge. The water rose to my knees, the temperature like knives. I reached for him just as another wave hit, impact. Cold. Silence. The world flipped. Salt filled my mouth. For a moment I saw nothing but bubbles and fragments of sky. The rope jerked tight, the only reason I didn't vanish into the dark. I clawed upward. Hands, rope, breath. When I surfaced, he was there, coughing, gripping the broken tripod like an anchor. Elena's voice cut through the wind. Get out! Both of you! We half fell, half crawled up the rocks, lungs burning, eyes streaming. She reached for him first, dragging him toward the path. I caught the railing and hauled myself after them. By the time we reached the keeper's house, my legs had stopped feeling like mine. The storm threw itself against the walls, desperate to get in. He collapsed onto the floor, water pooling beneath him. Elena knelt beside him, checking his pulse, her voice calm, clinical. I stood by the door, dripping, shaking, irrelevant. When she was sure he was breathing evenly, she turned to me. You shouldn't have gone down there, she said. It was reckless. I noticed, I said. She straightened. He could have died. So could I. Her expression didn't change. But she didn't. He's lucky. I wanted to laugh. He usually is. She frowned, maybe for the first time since arriving. You think I don't see how this looks? I'm not your enemy, Mara. Then stop acting like my mirror. She opened her mouth, closed it again, and left the room. He was still on the floor, head resting against the wall. I knelt beside him, the wet boards cold through my jeans. "You're insane," I whispered. He looked up at me, eyes unfocused. "It was her equipment. It would have. I don't care whose it was." My voice broke. "You run into storms for her, but you hesitate for me." He blinked. "That's not true," I said. "You waited once, remember? The night the fog closed in last winter. You said you didn't hear me on the radio." "You did." His silence confirmed it. I leaned back against the wall, exhaustion heavier than fear. The lamp still turned above us, a rhythm older than forgiveness. Outside, the wind screamed itself hoarse. Inside, everything else went quiet. When the power finally cut out, the room fell into darkness. Only the faint sweep of the lighthouse beam slid across the walls, marking time we'd never get back. The morning after the storm smelled of rust and rain. The world had been wiped raw salt on every window, seaweed tangled in the fence, a dead gull lying under the stairs with its wings folded neatly as if it had chosen stillness. Inside, silence hung like damp fabric. The generator was dead. The kettle refused to whistle. Even the clock had stopped. Its hands arrested at 3:17 the hour. The wind began to scream. He was still asleep on the cot near the hearth, an extra blanket thrown over him. Elena had moved back to the north cabin before dawn, leaving behind a note. "Gone to assess damage at Site B, will return before evening." Her handwriting was calm, untroubled. Mine would have trembled. I lit the small oil lamp, boiled water, and sat at the table. The room smelled of wet wool and iodine. His breathing was steady now, deeper than I'd heard in weeks. When the tea was ready, I poured 2 cups, then realized only one would be needed. I watched the steam twist and vanish, like every promise in this place. He woke around 9, blinking as if surfacing from somewhere too deep. "Morning," he rasped. "You're alive," I said. "Apparently." He tried to sit up, winced. "My ribs feel like driftwood." "You shouldn't have gone down there. You shouldn't have followed." We stared at each other, 2 arguments disguised as people. Finally, he looked away. "Elena's equipment don't." He stopped. The word had that effect, now a boundary drawn in salt. I gathered the wet clothes from the chair, wrung them out at the sink. The routine steadied me. I'd been keeping this light long enough to know order can substitute for peace. After I hung the clothes, I went to the storeroom to check the oil reserves. The floorboards creaked under my boots, old wood telling secrets. One plank near the bed dipped slightly, not new, but enough to catch my eye, something beneath. Curiosity is a dangerous mercy. I knelt, pried the board loose. Inside the narrow hollow lay a tin box wrapped in cloth. I knew it wasn't mine. My hiding places are never sentimental. I lifted it out, unwrapped it. Inside were photographs, field stations, gull nests, frostbitten landscapes. And her, Elena, in a younger version of herself, laughing into wind, camera slung around her neck, eyes bright with the kind of certainty that makes others orbit. In one photo, she stood beside him, closer than memory had admitted. In another, his hand rested on her shoulder. At the bottom of the box, a folded page, a letter. The ink had bled slightly from damp, but the signature was intact. "I'm proud of what we were, and of what you've become. Some homes you build only once." Yeah, I sat on the floor for a long time. The light through the cracked window made patterns on the photographs, grids of shadow like a net. I didn't cry. I don't anymore. When he came in later, he saw the box on the bed and stopped dead. "Mara, your driftwood had cargo," I said. He reached for the box. "It's not what you think. It never is. I kept them because you don't know how to bury anything properly." His face crumpled. "They're memories. That's all. They're altars," I said. "You keep them fed." "Mara, no. You keep saying this island is home." I pointed at the floorboards. "But what you called home was always a place you shared with her." He flinched like the words had weight. "She built the station with me," he said quietly. "You know that." "I know. I also know I'm just maintaining the light in someone else's house." He closed his eyes. "That isn't fair." "Neither is love," I said. The air between us felt thin, stripped of oxygen. He set the box down carefully, as if afraid to bruise its ghosts. "I'll move it," he said. "I should have long ago." "Don't bother," I said. Just make sure it doesn't rot the floor. That night, he slept in the workshop. The bed felt too large, too honest. When I woke near dawn, the storm had passed entirely. The sea lay flat, exhausted. I climbed the tower alone. The lens had salt streaks, but it still turned. I thought of the letter's final line. Some homes you build only once. Maybe that's true. Maybe I had mistaken maintenance for belonging. The first light cut through the morning haze, and the island exhaled. I whispered into the empty room, "Then let this be my house of glass, and let him live in his of ghosts." Absence, I've learned, has its own arithmetic. Subtract a person, and you find the space they filled doesn't vanish, it multiplies, echoing itself through everything left behind. Elena left first. The supply boat came early, cutting through the gray sea like a decision. She packed efficiently, all boxes and labels, and the kind of grace that only comes from being certain you've done nothing wrong. He helped her carry the last crate down the path. I watched from the tower, not hiding, not waving, simply existing at a different altitude. When the boat pulled away, her figure stayed at the rail until distance made her dissolve. He stood there long after she was gone, hands in pockets, as if he expected the wind to return her. By evening, the island felt emptied. Even the gulls were quieter, as if mourning the change in temperature. I spent the next hours cleaning, the ritual that replaces prayer. Wiping salt from glass, folding sheets, recording damage reports. The simple language of maintenance, the only one I still spoke fluently. He came back after dark, smelling of rain and diesel. For once, he didn't speak first. He just stood by the table, eyes drawn to the lamp I'd set there, the small brass one, not the tower light. Its flame was steady, practical, ordinary. "I should thank you," he said finally, "for what you did during the storm." "You already did," I replied. "When you didn't die." He almost smiled. "You're still cruel. I'm still accurate." He nodded, took a breath. "Elena's gone. She asked me to tell you she was grateful for your professionalism." I laughed, sharp and hollow. How generous. Gratitude from the woman who turned my life into footnotes. She meant it kindly. She always does. He looked tired, not the kind of tired that sleep cures, but the kind that grows from living inside contradictions too long. "Mara," he said quietly, "I never meant to make you feel replaceable." "You didn't make me feel that way," I said. "You measured it." He winced. "Then measure this." "I'm sorry." I stared at him. Sorry isn't data. We stood in silence, the lamplight dividing us into two small islands. He broke it first. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. "I've been offered a position on the mainland," I said. "Harbor Maintenance Division. Routine, predictable, away from ghosts." He nodded slowly, as if translating the words into regret. "When? Tomorrow? The supply boat will take me back." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it messier. "You'll hate it there. Too many people. Not enough sky." "I'll adapt. I always do." He looked at me, something fragile flickering behind his eyes. "You can stay. You know, the island needs you." "No," I said softly. "You need it. I just kept the light for you." He stepped closer. "It wasn't just for me." "Then for what?" "For us." I smiled, not kindly. "There is no us. There's just a data we mistook for love." He said my name once, like it might undo gravity. It didn't. When he left the room, the silence didn't follow him. It stayed, patient, familiar, waiting to be catalogued. That night, I packed what little I owned, a coat, my tools, the logbook. Before closing it, I wrote the final entry. Oil level, full. Wick height, nominal. Visibility, clear. Keeper, relieved of duty. Then I climbed the tower one last time. The glass smelled of salt and memory. The lamp turned, each rotation an equation solving itself toward zero. I stood there until dawn began its slow arithmetic light, divided by horizon, multiplied by distance, the formula of absence resolving cleanly, without remainder. The boat came at dawn, smaller than I remembered, a thin line of smoke curling from its exhaust, the engine stuttering against the calm sea. I had packed everything the night before, one canvas duffel, the logbook, a coil of rope I couldn't explain keeping, and a small jar of sea glass I once promised myself to throw away. The lighthouse keys hung around my neck like medals from a war no one won. He didn't come to the dock. At least, not at first. The captain waved from the boat, shouting over the motor. "You sure you're ready?" "Ready isn't the same as willing," I said, but he didn't hear. I placed the bag in the skiff and looked back one last time. The island stood there white, worn, stubborn. The light was still revolving, indifferent to who watched it. Then a voice behind me, "Mara." He was running down the slope, jacket half zipped, breath ragged. For a moment, he looked like the man I'd first met, the one who believed weather could be reasoned with. I didn't move. He stopped a few feet away, trying to catch his breath. "You weren't going to say goodbye." "I already did," I said. "Last night, to the light. That doesn't count." "It does to me." He stepped closer, eyes too bright from sleeplessness. "Don't go like this. Stay until the next rotation." "We can collect more data?" I asked. His face twisted. "No, stop it. I'm not pretending anymore." That caught me. For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. He went on, voice trembling with something that wasn't wind. "You were right. About everything. About her, about me. I built equations around her because they were safe, I could solve them. But you were the anomaly. You didn't fit the pattern. And I loved you for it." The word loved landed like a flare in fog, bright, useless. I shook my head. "You loved the way I steadied you. That's not the same thing." He took another step. "I realized after you found the box. I didn't keep those things for her, I kept them because I was afraid of losing proof I could once feel something true. Then I met you, and I didn't need proof anymore, but I was too cowardly to admit it." The captain called from the boat. "We have to leave with the tide." I turned back to the sea. "You should go home," I said. "This is home," he said. "No," I whispered. "This was your experiment. I was your constant." He flinched. "Then let me start again. Let me prove." "Don't." He stopped. "There's no control group for love," I said. "Once it's altered, you can't repeat it." He exhaled, slow and breaking. "So that's it." "Yes." "Mara," I climbed into the boat. The captain started the motor. He stood there, hair whipping in the wind as if words could outshout distance. I didn't look back again. The boat cut through the water, the island shrinking until the lighthouse was just a white thread between sky and sea. The light blinked once, twice, and then I couldn't tell if it was the beam or my eyes that blurred. He stayed on the dock long after I vanished. Later, I would imagine him climbing the tower, unlocking the hatch, standing where I used to stand. He would light the lamp, whisper the same words I had whispered every night. "Hold on." Maybe he did. Maybe he finally stopped pretending. Winter came soft that year. I was back on the mainland, living in a town where the ocean was only rumor, its salt carried faintly by trucks hauling fish at dawn. The new job suited me, routine maintenance on harbor lamps, docks, and fog sensors. Each light had a serial number, each task a checklist. Nothing demanded belief, only completion. People here said good morning out of habit. The air smelled of diesel and bread. Sometimes when the wind shifted, I could almost imagine the gulls again, faint, mathematical. Months passed. The ache dulled into pattern, like the background hum of machinery. That's what healing is. I think, learning to live at a lower volume. Then one morning, the supervisor called me into his office. "There's a message for you," he said. "From the island station." My hands went still. He slid a folded paper across the desk. The handwriting was familiar, cramped, slanted, too careful. "Mara, the lighthouse lens cracked last week. I've managed to patch it, but the light feels different now. Maybe it's supposed to. If you're ever near the coast again, you should see it. It still turns." I read it twice, then a third time, until the words lost grammar. That night, I walked down to the docks. The harbor water was black glass, trembling with reflections. Somewhere far beyond it, a faint pulse of light winked through the mist, steady, measured, forgiving. I didn't take the next boat out. I didn't need to. The light had already reached me. I stood there until dawn, letting the wind undo my hair, thinking of every equation we had failed to balance. Love, I realized, was never a proof, just a variable we mistook for certainty. And mercy, the only constant left. So I whispered it into the dark, to him, to the sea, to the glass tower that kept its promises. Be gentle with the light. and the horizon answered one slow blink, the arithmetic of mercy.